Welcome back. Today we look at the first of the sources that inform us about the Intertestamental Period, the biblical book of Daniel and its prophecies. We're sometimes told that biblical prophecies are simply history told in advance, but many of them leave us puzzled over the time to which they refer. Take Isaiah's prophecy in chapter 11 of a glorious future time when the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. It ends with, "The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Wow. But is that literal or a metaphor? And we'd like to know about the time, too. In a restored Israel, perhaps? Or maybe in a millennial paradise? Or is it a spiritual image of the harmony within the church? So often we are left to ask, when? The connection to history is obscure. But not always. Take some of Daniel's prophecies. They are tied closely, even explicitly, to the events of secular history. Today we will look at a few examples of this. Prophecy as history, told in advance. Consider Daniel chapter 2. The time is perhaps 590 BC, and many Jews are in exile in Babylon. The young prophet learns that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has had a disturbing dream. He has demanded that someone tell him its meaning, and to guarantee their truthfulness, they must first tell him the dream itself. After intense prayer with his friends, Daniel comes forward. Daniel answered the king and said, "No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind." Daniel continues, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of Kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. The account goes on. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. What are these kingdoms? We need a historian here. Being from the Bible, he says, it must be from Israel's perspective. I see some similarities with historical kingdoms, but don't hold me to any identifications. A look at secular history suggests 4 empires, he says, even though 3 of the 4 are not yet on the scene for Daniel. They look like this. Babylon, which was the dominant power in the Middle East from 626 to 539 BC, is the head of gold. It will be supplanted in 539 by Medo-Persia, with the joining of Media and Persia symbolized by the statue's 2 arms. It will come to power when Cyrus the Great sweeps Babylon into oblivion, and the Persian Empire will hold sway until 330 BC. Then out of the west will come a Greek army under Alexander the Great, determined to punish the Persians for their attempt to conquer Greece in the so-called Persian Wars. In 3 decisive battles, Medo-Persia will go down into the dustbin of history, and Alexander will go on to conquer much of the known world. But there is still a kingdom of iron to come, and 146 BC will mark the turning point as Rome rises to dominate the Mediterranean world. But I said Israel's perspective, and this is speculation on my part, but all of them help to shape Jewish history. The kingdom of Judea was crushed by Babylon, and the Jews were condemned to 70 years of exile, 606 to 539 BC. The end of Babylon brought liberation, as Cyrus the Great allowed them to return to Israel. But further kings authorized the rebuilding of the temple and the walls of Jerusalem. All this under the relatively benign rule of Medo-Persia's kings. And then came the Greeks, conquering and spreading Greek culture at the point of a lance. The Jews suffered under that forced Hellenization, and at one point the temple itself was desecrated. This outrage sparked a rebellion led by a priest, Mattathias, and his sons, who came to be known as the Maccabees, the Hammer of God. They eventually won their independence, and for more than 100 years Israel was again free of oppressors. Then, however, came the 4th kingdom, in the person of Pompey the Great, and Israel was subjugated to the power of Rome. Our professor continues his musing. Now, this part about iron and clay, that's interesting. Rome did have a different fate from the other kingdoms. Each of them fell to the power of a new world empire. Rome didn't. Although apparently strong and unified, it ultimately lost its coherence. It broke apart into individual tribes and states. There was no fifth world empire. Oh, well, not a secular empire, because the text continues, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. I suppose Christians would have their idea about that. We certainly do. At the height of Rome's power, in an obscure corner of the Mediterranean world, a Roman governor put to death a Jew who claimed to be a king. And he was. Executed but risen again, he established a kingdom that, after 2,000 years, still continues to spread throughout the world, and we are assured that it will indeed stand forever. All of this God revealed to a prophet and to a king back in about 590 BC, the sweep of some half a millennium as kingdoms would rise and fall. Prophecy as history, told in advance. Right, Professor? He seems to be on the fence. Probable, he admits. But there's more. Look now at the 8th chapter of Daniel, where we will see more of what was to happen in these centuries. Daniel is granted a vision, a terrifying one filled with symbolic animals. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. We still have our historian here. The 2 horns might identify this ram as Medo-Persia. The Median Empire was first, to be joined by the Persian, but that latter horn grew to be the greater power in the alliance. Sweeping out of the east, it extended its reach through Turkey and even threatened to overwhelm the Greeks. Battles with names like Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea marked the limits of her expansion. But despite these setbacks, for 2 full centuries, Persia dominated history. And then, as Daniel saw, the scene changed. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. The goat, no doubt, was Greece, led by Alexander the Great. He resolves to punish the Persians for their attempt to occupy Greece, and he sweeps eastward with speed that astonishes the world. In just 11 years he conquers much of the known world, then dies on campaign at the age of 33. Alexander streaks across history like a meteor, and he carves out the greatest empire the world has seen. That could fit, says our mentor. Daniel sees it all. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. This one could fit too, our historian says. As Alexander died of a fever, and legend says that when he was asked to whom he would leave his empire, he smiled and said, "To the strongest." Strife and confusion followed until 4 of his generals, they're called the Diadochi, finally arrived at an agreement. Cassander will take Greece, Lysimachus, Thrace, and western Turkey, Seleucus, the east, and Ptolemy, Egypt. Daniel's vision continues. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering, because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Well, if we follow this conjecture, our professor notes, the glorious land would be Israel, and the little horn, the Greek ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes. His title means God revealed, and he must have thought of himself in that way, because in only 10 years as Seleucid king, he did horrendous damage to the Jews and left a blot on history. All in the name of spreading Greek culture, Antiochus did his best to destroy the Jewish religion. Demanding sacrifice to pagan gods, he even entered the temple and desecrated it, sacrificing a pig on the altar. He plundered the temple's treasures and installed cult prostitutes there, in imitation of the practice in Greece. But this is not just conjecture. Look what's next. The vision explains to Daniel just what the animals mean. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. That realm prevailed, as we saw, for some 200 years. And the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. But even so, Greek dominion will last almost 200 years. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. That, of course, is Antiochus. His power shall be great, but not by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. Point by point, the images mean just what we supposed. Again, prophecy as history, told in advance, isn't it? And there's even more. Look at this. Daniel 11 summarizes 400 years of future history. All these kings are referenced in the chapter, not by name, but by their actions, and it all fits. Here's an example from the reign of Ptolemy III and Seleucus II. Ptolemy's daughter, sent to ally with Seleucus, is murdered. One of her family line will arise to take her place. He will attack the forces of the king of the north and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and be victorious. He will also seize their gods, their metal images, and their valuable articles of silver and gold, and carry them off to Egypt. For some years he will leave the king of the north alone. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, but will retreat to his own country. And here's how it corresponds. In retaliation for the death of his sister, Berenike, nephew, and his kingdom subjects, Ptolemy III Euergetes, 246 to 221, who had succeeded his father, invaded the Seleucid Empire, forces of the king of the north, gained control of its capital city, Antioch, and plundered its wealth, their valuable articles of silver and gold. He also succeeded in putting to death Laodike, the murderess of his sister. He did not press for total conquest of the empire. In fact, he left the throne there to Seleucus II Callinicus, 246 to 226, son of Antiochus II by Laodice. In 242, Seleucus II retreated from an invasion of Egypt, his army decimated, but will retreat to his own country. How about that? And that Daniel 8 passage contains something even more remarkable. Two angels address the horror of the desecration of God's temple. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." 2,300 evenings and mornings. Since the Jewish practice involved both evening and morning sacrifices, the reference must be to half that number, or 1,150 days. A historian would know this. The sacrifice was ended in 167 BC and was restored thanks to the Maccabees in 164. 1,150 days comes to just over 3 years, and here is what 1 Maccabees records. On the anniversary of the day on which the Gentiles had desecrated it, on that very day it was dedicated with songs, harps, lyres, and cymbals. The prophecy hits that mark exactly from 400 years in advance. But now our expert backtracks. He cites that logical axiom, "What proves too much proves nothing." All that detail would require us to believe there is real prophecy, and scholars know better. Well, they have been after Daniel for a really long time. Even as early as the 3rd century AD, skeptics began to say that Daniel could not have been written so early. Porphyry said it comes from about 165 BC, when the 4 empires were all known. So, right down to today, we see judgments like this one. Most modern biblical scholars maintain that the book was written in large part during the mid-2nd century BCE, and that most of the predictions of the book refer to events that had already occurred. Now, Exactly what evidence is there that Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC when all of this had already occurred? There is no such evidence. None. Nothing. That date is only offered so that the prophecies can be explained as history written after the fact. But let's test that 2nd century date anyway, because there is some evidence independent of the Bible to show that the book was written earlier than that. The Jewish historian Josephus tells us about how in 331 BC, Alexander the Great, fresh from having taken the cities of Tyre and Gaza, entered Jerusalem. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended. That's Josephus, Antiquities, 11:337. Oh, and there is an editor's note on that passage. Quote, "Unfortunately, modern research has shown convincingly that the book of Daniel was written in about 165 BCE. And on what evidence? None, as I said." Now, one cannot be sure that Josephus' tale is correct, but at the very least, it shows that he, in the 1st century AD, believed that the book of Daniel was already stored in the temple in the 4th century BC. And lacking any evidence to the contrary, why not believe him and move that date back, at least that far? But here is something better than a story from Josephus. What if there were a prophecy in Daniel of an event that occurred even later than the 2nd century BC? Might that refute this notion of a late date for Daniel? Well, as it happens, there are some such. Here is one. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be rebuilt with a plaza and a moat, but in difficult times. Well, in 444 BC, Darius of Persia issued his decree authorizing the rebuilding of the city. Conservative scholars tend to agree that, in prophecy, a week refers to a period of 7 years, not days. So 7 weeks, 49 years, from the decree to the completion of Jerusalem's rebuilding. That brings us to 395 BC, a good agreement with historical records. And then another 62 weeks until the coming of Messiah the Prince. That would be 427 years, or a total of 476. What would be the event the angel refers to at the end of that period? Recall Zechariah 9:9. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Who else but Jesus, both Messiah and Prince, matches that language? The angel is referring to Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem as Messiah. That took place on Nisan 9, AD 33. And from Nisan 1, 444 BC, to Nisan 9, AD 33, is 476 years, exact to the year. In fact, even to the very week, 173,880 days. How could this book, even if written in the 2nd century BC, predict the exact time of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem? So, giving Daniel a later date doesn't help the critics. This is a prophecy, told with supernatural precision in advance. And there's more. The very next verse in Daniel 9 says, "After those 62 weeks, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary." Indeed, as we all know, only days after his triumphal entry, Jesus is arrested, condemned, and crucified. And there, being cut off, the Anointed One does in fact have nothing. Even his robe has been taken by the soldiers. And the prophecy continues. Only a generation later, the Jewish rebellion ends in disaster as Titus, soon to become emperor of Rome, lays siege to Jerusalem, breaks through its defenses, and destroys it, just as Daniel's angelic informant has said centuries earlier. Even if written in 2nd century BC, our timeline shows the precision of this prophecy, the crucifixion and Jerusalem's fate that mark it as the real thing, God's revelation of the future. Daniel, a book filled with prophecy. If that one prophecy in Daniel 9 is genuine, showing us the Messiah's entry into Jerusalem, his horrible death, and the devastation of Jerusalem, then all the others can be as well. And there is no reason to date Daniel later than he actually lived in the 500s BC, and we can move him back to where he belongs. After all, God is the God of history, whether past or future. All of time belongs to him. But before we leave this topic, let's note a grim warning. We have just seen how Jesus' entry in Jerusalem as king was prophesied to the very day. And on that day, as he was ready to enter the city, Luke 19 tells us, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, 'Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation.'" Jesus wept. Why? If only his people, not just the ones who lined the road, had studied Daniel's prophecy and understood it, they would have known that day and the time of that visitation. But since they did not, destruction was coming. When God warns us of something, the price for our inattention can be terribly high. If you have questions about this lecture, or any of the others in the Good Answers series, you may address them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.